At 67, Ava Gardner finally speaks up about Humphrey Bogart. Ava Gardner was born Ava Lavinia Gardner on December 24, 1922, in Grabtown, a small rural community in North Carolina. Raised in a modest working-class family, Ava's early life was shaped by the struggles and resilience common to many in the Depression-era South. Her parents were poor tobacco sharecroppers, and Ava was the youngest of 7 children. Despite facing economic hardship and personal challenges during her formative years, she displayed an innate beauty and presence that would later define her screen persona. Her Southern roots remained a central part of her identity, influencing both her demeanor and her approach to life and career, as she carried herself with an unmistakable blend of natural elegance and down-to-earth authenticity. Ava's entrance into Hollywood was marked by a combination of luck, timing, and undeniable talent. She was discovered in the early 1940s by MGM talent scouts, who were captivated not only by her striking physical beauty, her luminous green eyes, honey blonde hair, and classic features, but also by the intensity and charisma that radiated from her. Gardner's early career involved small roles that gradually showcased her acting range, but it was her breakout performance in films such as The Killers, 1946, that cemented her reputation as a force to be reckoned with on screen. Her portrayal of complex, often morally ambiguous women revealed a depth of talent that transcended mere glamour, allowing her to move seamlessly between roles of seduction, vulnerability, and fierce independence. Ava Gardner's career was marked by collaborations with some of the greatest directors and actors of her era, including John Huston, Humphrey Bogart, and Burt Lancaster. She worked tirelessly to refine her craft, often bringing a raw, emotional intensity to her characters that resonated with audiences and critics. Notable films such as Mogambo, 1953, for which she received an Academy Award nomination, Showboat, 1951, and On the Beach, 1959, showcased her versatility and enduring appeal. Her performances often explored themes of love, loss, and resilience, reflecting not only her artistic talents, but also her deep understanding of human emotion. Soon after Ava Gardner arrived in Los Angeles and began her contract work with MGM, she quickly crossed paths with one of the studio's brightest young stars, Mickey Rooney. At the time, Rooney was a household name, adored across America for his role as the wholesome Andy Hardy in the immensely popular film series. The two were swept up in a whirlwind romance, and despite Gardner's small-town upbringing and relative inexperience with Hollywood's fast-paced lifestyle, she found herself captivated by Rooney's charm, humor, and high energy. Their relationship moved quickly, culminating in marriage on January 10, 1942, when Gardner was only 19 years old. The ceremony was held in the remote little town of Ballard, California, far from the spotlight of Los Angeles. This decision was not simply a matter of privacy, but a deliberate move orchestrated by MGM studio head Louis B. Mayer. Mayer feared that news of Rooney's marriage might damage the carefully constructed public image of Andy Hardy, the all-American boy next door. Mayer worried that if audiences knew Rooney was married, particularly to a beautiful young woman like Gardner, fans, especially young girls who idolized him, would lose interest in the wholesome single persona that had made him such a box-office draw. Unfortunately, the marriage unraveled almost as quickly as it began. Gardner discovered that behind Rooney's boyish charm lay a darker side, marked by heavy gambling and womanizing. Though Rooney's public persona radiated innocence, in private he lived fast, indulging in late-night parties, affairs, and reckless spending. Gardner, still adjusting to life in Hollywood, was devastated by his behavior. By 1943, barely a year into the marriage, she filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty as the official reason. Privately, however, she attributed the breakdown of the marriage to Rooney's compulsive gambling habits and his constant infidelities. Despite the painful personal toll, Gardner was careful not to tarnish Rooney's image in the press. She refrained from publicly exposing his shortcomings, thus preserving the beloved on-screen character of Andy Hardy for his adoring fans. The press and the studio maintained Rooney's wholesome image, and Gardner quietly walked away, her first Hollywood marriage having taught her a hard lesson about the reality behind the glamorous facades of fame. Gardner's second marriage followed only a couple of years later, this time to jazz musician and band leader Artie Shaw, one of the most prominent figures in the swing era. Shaw, who had previously been married to screen siren Lana Turner, was known for his extraordinary musical talent, but also for his difficult and domineering personality. Gardner, still in her early 20s, was swept up in the sophisticated world of Shaw's music and intellectualism. However, their union quickly proved to be troubled. Shaw reportedly expected Gardner to mold herself to his exacting standards, often criticizing her education and background. He was a perfectionist, not just in his music, but in his relationships, and Gardner soon found his condescension intolerable. Their marriage, lasting from 1945 to 1946, was brief and stormy, leaving Gardner disillusioned once again about her prospects for lasting love. It was her third marriage, however, that became the most significant and enduring chapter of her romantic life. In 1951, Ava Gardner wed singer and actor Frank Sinatra, a man whose fame rivaled her own. Sinatra had left his first wife, Nancy Barbato, to be with Gardner, and their union sparked a media frenzy. Headlines blared with the scandal of Sinatra leaving his family for the glamorous starlet, and the public's fascination with their romance only grew over time. Gardner herself would later write in her autobiography that Sinatra was the great love of her life. Their relationship was passionate, magnetic, and deeply complicated, marked by both intense devotion and destructive fights. The Gardner-Sinatra marriage was as fiery as it was famous. Both stars were headstrong, fiercely independent, and living under the relentless scrutiny of the press. Their union was plagued by jealousy, explosive arguments, and reconciliations that were as passionate as their quarrels. During their time together, Gardner became pregnant twice, but she chose to terminate both pregnancies. In her autobiography, published posthumously 8 months after her death, she explained that MGM enforced strict contract clauses penalizing its female stars for having children. The studio feared motherhood would interfere with a star's availability and diminish her marketability, and Gardner felt trapped by those pressures. Her decisions reflected the difficult position women in Hollywood often faced, forced to prioritize careers over personal lives due to the control exerted by the studios. By 1954, the constant turmoil proved too much, and Gardner filed for divorce. However, their legal separation was a drawn-out process, and the divorce was not finalized until 1957. Despite the end of their marriage, the bond between Gardner and Sinatra never truly broke. In fact, after the divorce, they managed to transform their turbulent romance into a lasting friendship. Gardner always spoke of Sinatra with affection, calling him the love of her life, and Sinatra, in turn, continued to support and care for her. Their connection endured long after the passion had cooled, and they remained close until Gardner's passing in 1990. Their relationship, both during and after marriage, became one of Hollywood's most legendary love stories, remembered for its intensity, drama, and enduring emotional depth. By the time Ava Gardner reached the age of 67, she had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. She had been a dazzling MGM starlet, a global screen icon, a Hollywood scandal maker, a 3-time wife, a jet-set adventuress, and in her later years, a woman reflecting upon her place in cinema's golden age. Throughout her career, Gardner had worked alongside many of Hollywood's most famous leading men: Clark Gable, Gregory Peck, Burt Lancaster, and Frank Sinatra, who became one of the great loves of her life. Yet, for decades, one figure from her past loomed large, often mentioned by others, but rarely spoken of in detail by Ava herself, Humphrey Bogart. Bogart, by the time Gardner entered the Hollywood spotlight, was already a fully established star. He had transformed himself from a character actor in gangster roles to one of the most iconic leading men of the 1940s, thanks to Casablanca, 1942, and The Maltese Falcon, 1941. He carried with him a reputation for being tough, cynical, and coolly detached. But those who knew him well also described a man of sharp wit, surprising sensitivity, and a deep loyalty to his friends. Gardner, however, was cautious about commenting on him publicly, partly out of respect, partly out of the complicated politics of Hollywood, and partly because she disliked feeding the gossip mills that swirled around her. But in her late 60s, long after Bogart's death in 1957, Gardner finally allowed herself to speak more candidly. Sitting in her London flat, in a reflective mood, she remarked with a wistful half-smile, "Bogart was one of a kind. He wasn't just the tough guy the movies made him out to be. He was sharp, funny, and he had this way of making you feel like you were in on the joke with him. I always admired that about him." She paused before continuing, elaborating on the difference between Bogart's screen persona and the man she had known off camera. People forget that Bogey wasn't a big man physically. He wasn't tall or handsome in the way Cary Grant was. But the moment he walked into a room, the atmosphere changed. He had presence, pure magnetism. You couldn't take your eyes off him. That's something you can't fake, not in real life, not on-screen. Gardner, who had often been unfairly dismissed in her early years as simply a beautiful face, felt a kind of kinship with Bogart in the way Hollywood underestimated them both at first. She reflected, "He had to fight to prove himself just as I did. People thought I was just another pretty girl MGM had picked up, and for a while they were right. I didn't know the first thing about acting. But Bogey understood that struggle, that need to show you were more than the labels they stuck on you." When asked about their personal interactions, Gardner was careful but still warm in her recollections. She remembered nights out when Bogart and his wife Lauren Bacall entertained friends, and she, often part of the Hollywood circle that orbited Sinatra, found herself in Bogart's company. Bogey was protective of the people he cared about. He and Frank were close, and through Frank, I got to know him better. He could drink anyone under the table, but even when he was 3 sheets to the wind, he still had that twinkle in his eye. He had a way of making you feel seen, even if the whole room was clamoring for his attention. As she grew older, Gardner began to feel a kind of nostalgia for the era Bogart represented, an era that was already fading by the 1950s. "When I think about Bogey, I think about the end of a certain Hollywood. He was part of the last generation that didn't give a damn about polish. He smoked, he drank, he said what he thought. The studios couldn't manufacture another Bogart if they tried. Believe me, they tried with a dozen other men, but it never worked. He was the real thing." Her tone turned softer as she acknowledged his personal struggles. "He wasn't perfect. He had his demons like all of us did. He could be moody, stubborn, sometimes difficult. But that's what made him human. That's what made him Bogart. And I suppose that's why, even now, all these years later, people still can't let him go. He left something behind that's untouchable." By speaking openly about Bogart at 67, Ava Gardner was not only offering a rare glimpse into the private world of one of Hollywood's greatest stars, but also, in a way, reflecting on her own mortality and legacy. In describing Bogart's authenticity, his magnetism, and his humanity, she was also affirming the values she herself cherished most: the refusal to be reduced to an image, the struggle to be taken seriously, and the enduring power of personality over time. In closing her thoughts that afternoon, Gardner sighed gently, her voice filled with both admiration and melancholy. "I don't think there will ever be another Bogey. He belonged to his time, and yet he somehow belongs to all time. If you ask me, that's the best any of us can hope for, to be remembered the way he is, and he deserves every bit of it. In 1986, Ava Gardner's glamorous yet turbulent life was shaken when she suffered a devastating stroke. The once vibrant actress, renowned for her radiant beauty and powerful screen presence, suddenly found herself facing the fragility of health. Though she had accumulated enough wealth to cover her medical expenses, an extraordinary gesture of devotion came from none other than Frank Sinatra, the man who had once been the great love of her life. Sinatra, who had never stopped caring for Ava despite their fiery and stormy past, insisted on taking care of her treatment. He arranged for her to travel in comfort and safety, hiring a medically staffed private plane to bring her to a specialist in the United States. For Ava, who was known for her fierce independence and pride, allowing Sinatra to step in was a remarkable acknowledgment of the enduring bond they shared, a bond that time and distance had never truly broken. Despite such efforts, her health continued to decline in the years that followed. On January 25, 1990, the world lost one of its most dazzling stars when Ava Gardner passed away at the age of 67. The cause was bronchopneumonia, and she died quietly in Westminster, London, far from her North Carolina roots but surrounded by the timeless aura of Hollywood legend that had never faded. Her death sent ripples across the entertainment industry, with admirers remembering not only her unforgettable performances in classics like The Killers, Mogambo, and The Barefoot Contessa, but also the untamed spirit that had made her one of cinema's most iconic women. 4 days later, on January 29th, Ava Gardner was brought home to Smithfield, North Carolina, where she was laid to rest in Sunset Memorial Park. There, beside her beloved siblings and her parents, Jonas and Molly Gardner, the small-town girl who had risen to become one of the most glamorous stars in the world, found eternal peace. Her grave remains a site of quiet pilgrimage for fans who continue to honor her memory, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of admiration.